I'm making a Metroidvania RPG city builder with a story-based tower defense mode, and since I like balance in my life, I'm trying to do it in just 2 weeks.
I'm Matt with Nightrun Studio, and I'm heading into week 2 of this challenge with a mild sense of impending doom. If you missed part 1, be sure to check out that video before returning here.
With the first week of the holiday behind me, I was feeling pretty good about all I'd accomplished, but I also realized I had a lot left to do in only 1 week. So, on day 8, I decided to add some actual gameplay elements, seeing this is, like a game. I created a sliding UI bar where I'd be able to toggle different buildings. Probably spent way too much time designing these slots, but in the end, I was pretty happy with how they turned out. At each step along the way, I was trying to make my code as reusable as possible. This was starting to pay off in a number of ways. For example, you can see that I have a lumber depot slot here. However, let's say I want to create a slot for my stick hut. I actually don't have to redo anything. I have this scriptable object here, which stores all the stats for each building. All I have to do is slide that scriptable object in my building script, and now when I start the game, it automatically populates the UI with the correct image and data. Down the road, this should make it much easier to add more buildings to the game. Now, about that gameplay part. Did you know that I hate buttons? If you know any UI designers out there, please give them a hug and tell them how much you appreciate them. Never realized how much work goes into things like animating a button press, making it so when you click one button, the other buttons unclick, adding a feature so that when you click away from the buttons, they all unclick. Honestly, buttons are the worst. That said, by the end of the day, I was able to get things set up so I could properly click buttons. When I did, a scale image of the building would follow my mouse, and I could click again to place the building on the map. Day 9 started off well. I created a resource manager object which could keep track of my totals for things like lumber and population. At this point, my villagers were interacting properly with the buildings. Stats were working like they should. Felt like I had a foundation to build on for the city building and tower defense parts of the game. But then I noticed something. Over time, my villagers were sinking down into the ground until eventually they became paralyzed. It was like some kind of evil game design quicksand. This had never been a problem before, and I looked everywhere to find the source of the problem. Eventually, I realized that the characters were moving along the Z-axis. They were actually moving closer to the camera and away from the level they were interacting with. They weren't actually sinking into the ground. It only looked that way because of the perspective of the camera. And the problem was my animation. Unity has a really powerful animator feature, but sometimes I just don't know why it does what it does. I combed through my animations but couldn't find anything there that could be modifying the Z-axis of my characters. Ultimately, I decided to scrap the squash and stretch animations I'd been using and replace them with actual sprite-based animations. Fortunately, I already had a lot of these sprites created in Photoshop, but the process of setting up timings and attaching everything in Unity took most of the rest of the day. At the end of the day, I was feeling slightly beleaguered, but the animations did look a lot better than the old ones, and I was excited to start making some real progress the next day. Day 10. Ooh, double digits. I really got to make some serious progress today. So, day 10 was all about adding functionality to the villager. I made it so you could only place buildings if you had enough resources. I added unplaceable layers so you couldn't float buildings in the sky or build them inside of the earth. I made it so you could toggle the menu between building and villager placement, and added the ability to actually place those villagers. That got a little out of hand. So I limited villager placement so that once a villager entered the game, his villager slot would disappear from the UI menu. I actually had the beginnings of a gameplay loop here. You could only place buildings if you had enough resources, and you could only place villagers if you had enough buildings to house them. You also needed to act quickly enough that the villagers were ready to defend the town by the time the enemy portal opened up and spawned in attackers. It was a good day. But now day 10 was gone, and there was still a lot left to do. Alright, it was time to stop neglecting the exploration and RPG elements of this game, so I used day 11 to add in my player character. If you followed this channel, you've probably seen me reworking animations for movement for Willard for over the past couple months now. Oh, yeah, are we doing that? Okay then, let's cue up the montage. So yeah, that was the thing I did. not doing this 2 weeks. Anyway, today I took that work and dropped it into my new prototype. That makes it sound a lot easier than it actually was. There's a lot of connecting, debugging, and balancing that had to happen. But by the end of the day, you can now run around this small world as Willard. The camera follows him, so if you want to place a new building, you need Willard to run to that area to make the command. He's also able to help in defense of the village. He's got a health bar of his own, though he isn't actually able to die yet. Day 12 probably would have been a good time to cut back my expectations and rethink just how much I could accomplish before this challenge ended. But again, this challenge is about more than just making a game in a short time. I'm trying to set myself up with a vertical slice of what Willard might look like down the road, and story-based elements are an absolute must for that game. So, I added a dialogue system. This actually went shockingly quickly. Before long, I was able to approach and speak with NPCs on the map. But I really hate NPCs who just stand there and wait for the player to show up and save them. So at the very least, I wanted them to have a lost wandering state. Now, I could have just quickly thrown together a movement script, but again, I want to think about the grander architecture of the game. So I added this to my villager state machine. I created a wandering state as well as a pause state where the villager waits and rests. Adding these features took up valuable time, but I know I won't regret taking the time to do this properly. Oh man, day 13. I needed to scale this thing up. I did some level design, adding an underground area as well as some more mountains to explore. I also wired up the lost villager NPCs so that after talking to them, they disappear from the scene, but reappear as available slots in your villager UI, which you can place back at the village. And this is where I made another bad choice. I really didn't like the transition between the snowy world above and the underground beneath it. I decided to make some graphic transitions. So I set up a trigger. When the player passes it going downward, the light fades out, the snow slowly stops, and the fog shader fades out. Additionally, the underground dust particles fade in. The opposite happens when I go back up. I don't know why. Maybe I was a little tired after 13 days of pushing, but getting this all to work together was really difficult. I ended up coding until 2 a.m. before I finally got it all working.
I'm mostly happy with how this looks, but it may not have been the best use of time on the second last day.
Oh man, day 14. This last day was all about adding content and fixing bugs. And wow, was there a lot of bugs. When my time finally ran out, I have to admit that I didn't quite meet my lofty goals. That said, I created an amazing foundation that I'm going to be able to build on, and here's what it looks like.
There's a short intro scene, which just kind of gives you a general goal for what to do at the start of the game. At that point, you're more or less free to explore and do what you will. Combat's up and running, and while it's a little stiff, it's pretty serviceable. We've got items that can heal you, and some branching paths you can explore in different directions. You'll have to strategize how to attack enemies in different positions, and there are villagers to discover and rescue. Once rescued, the villagers are moved to your villager tab in your inventory, which opens up automatically when you get back in the village area. You can place them in the village, but first you'll need to add houses so that they actually have a place to live. At this point, the two sort of work together. You need more villagers to open up more buildings, but you need appropriate buildings so the villagers actually have a place to take their resources and a place to live. In addition to enemies that just spawn on the map at the beginning, there's also a mysterious portal that will open at various points in the game. You get a prompt when this happens. Ultimately, you'll be able to choose your playstyle, whether to go head-on and attack when these portals open up, whether to go defend your village, or whether to just build up the defenses of your village so it can defend itself and you can just keep on exploring. That said, you'll have to be sure not to neglect the village too much, as houses will break out in flames and eventually be destroyed if nobody's there to defend them. Once a villager dies, they are removed from the game, so you'll have to balance defending your existing villagers against going out and finding new ones to join your village.
At this point, there's a million ways to improve on this, and that's what I plan to do over the next couple of months. My plan is to craft this into a much deeper, much less buggy demo that I can release for feedback by the start of summer. If that's something you're interested in participating in, let me know. I'd also love to hear your thoughts, suggestions, or other ideas.
If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to hit like or leave a comment down below. Till next time, this is Matt with Nightrun Studio. Cheers.